All right, so welcome to a review of chapter 21. Now, I'm the first one to admit I've been gone for a while. I disappeared, but I started working on a new project. You can catch it on Spotify. That's the only place I have it until I figure out all these other links. I'm techie, but I guess I'm not that techie. But it's called Morning Coffee with me, Professor Alex. And I hit there. My blog, if you've had a chance to look at it, doesn't just focus on bankruptcy. It does focus on other issues, especially financial issues, personal finance, and even now with these potential issues of a recession coming, and a blog post will be coming out on that actually tomorrow. I'm trying to do other things so just that we can all be prepared financially. The goal is, sometimes we need to use bankruptcy as a way to protect our financial future. And if we don't, we still need to be informed and learn to take the steps that are required to protect ourselves. So I've been gone, I've been working on that for a while, but here I am. I'm ready for chapter 21 and continuing talking about the means test. Now, the means test in the prior chapter, I just went over the basics, CMI, currently monthly income, in the last 6 months. But I'm going to look at a couple different things here. And that's why this was divided into two parts when it comes to the means testing. First of all, if you pass the means test, and this is where the confusion is, people confuse the means test and they think, well, I passed the means test, I don't have to worry anymore about filing Chapter 7, but they're not taking in everything else into consideration. For example, are there any non exempt assets that might force a debtor to file Chapter 13? The other issue is disposable income. So it's not just the means test. Remember, I've said this consistently throughout these seminars, and I say it throughout my textbook, I say it through my blog. The means test, when they changed the law in 2005, the whole concept was to make bankruptcy more difficult for debtors and force them to Chapter 13. And that's where this means test comes in. So even if you pass the means test, you still might have to do Chapter 13 anyway, especially if you fell behind on arrears, right? And we'll talk about Chapter 13 in the next video. Now, if you don't pass the means test, there is still another bite at the apple, like I said in the textbook. And that's where we go to the second opportunity now to try to pass the means test. And it gets a little more detailed. Before, when you did CMI, you just put in the income, see what happens. But if it's above that amount, well, now we can start adding in all these IRS allowable expenses, which this is what makes the means test confusing, especially scratching my head the first time I saw it. It's like, what do you mean I can declare X amount as a cost when that's not really my cost? Well, that's exactly what the means test is. I know. Do not try to wrap your brain around that. It will drive you insane. Just play the game, do what they ask, and you'll be fine. Now, I'll give you an example. I drive an F-250 truck. I don't know what the IRS allowable expenses are for my truck, for one vehicle. But whatever it is, it's going to be a lot higher than what I actually spend. I rarely drive the car. The car, wow, I think 4,000 miles, and I'm might even be off on that in the last 2 years. Yeah. So, but hey, the means testing says I can deduct X amount from my allowable expenses, and it's including in all these factors such as maintenance and gas and all that. That doesn't really apply to me. I could go weeks without gas. I don't drive much. That's the bottom line. So, but again, it's allowed under this second part of the means test. And of course, it factors in, and this is the part that really scratches everybody's head, is the more debt, the better. Now, I tell clients you can't earn 40,000 a year and buy a Ferrari and think you're going to get away with this. You should be driving a car that matches your income, a Honda Accord or whatever it is. So, but the means test is affected by secured debt. That's why I've given examples in prior videos where you have someone who everything is the same, income's the same, location's the same, everything's the same, except one person. Oh, and let me just change it. One person doesn't have secured debt. They rent at 1,000 a month, but the other person has a mortgage of 1,000 or even better. Let's go higher. They're going to get credits on the means test that does not apply. So the best way to learn the means test is, like I've said before, continue working with examples, work on the means test while you listen to these videos and start changing the numbers. Do everything hypothetically. You do a means test where the client failed based on income alone. and then you jump to the second part and then add a condo to it. Say the condo's worth 80,000. Was that enough to pass? No. What about 125,000? And you keep playing with the numbers, and then you'll get a better understanding of how this works when you look at the final numbers and all the deductions that are granted. That way, when you explain it to clients, you know, it doesn't sound as crazy as, by the way, it does sound crazy that the more debt is the better, but that is also an issue with the trustee that we'll discuss later on. But that's what you need to know. You need to know that you have to go into more details now. We have IRS allowable expenses, even if those expenses are not what the debtor normally has. It also means getting into detail into the debts, and again, more secure debt. It's a mathematical formula. So for one case, $20,000 on a car is more than enough. In another case, it may not be. Just really depends. But the IRS allowable expenses is what allows us to make these deductions. I would just call it deductions or credits. If you have these secured debts, it's going to help. And as you can see here, there's other things that are factored into play. Regarding the household expenses, how much is being spent on healthcare, etc. So the IRS allowable expenses, or even when you're doing this, especially if you're doing it, with your software, definitely even change dependents. You'll see when you change the dependents, all these numbers on the IRS allowable expenses are going to change drastically. It is not the same, just being practical, to have two dependents in your home versus three, or zero versus one. Those numbers are going to change drastically as well. Now, we'll get into chapter 13 in the following video, but just to go over it briefly, how do we get to dealing with this issue of the means test, and if we're going to go to chapter 13 or not? Well, again, it's really based on income. We got to focus on the income here. What is the income of the debtor? And based on that number, we're going to determine almost if we're going to jump to chapter 13 or not. Chapter 13 will be, they're above the median average income in their state. Now, I say almost for the reason that, remember, we still have to look at disposable income, and we also have to look at if there's any non-exempt assets. So to do some, quick ideas, if there's non-exempt assets, let me try a text box here. Let me see if this works. All right. I'm doing this on the fly, so don't criticize me. Let's say the car is worth 20,000. Okay, that works. And the state exemption is 5,000, and there's a $5,000 lien on the car, right? What are the numbers here? Well, with $5,000 lien on the car, we have 15,000 in equity, right? Subtract the 5,000, we are now down to 10,000 in equity, right? What does that mean? Well, that 10,000, how are we going to pay that back? If it's something that a debtor cannot afford to pay that back within the time frame, no more than 12 months, 10 months is 10 to 12 months is what a chapter 7 trustee would allow, then that's when we're talking about filing chapter 13. So again, don't get confused. Bankruptcy is not just based solely on the means test. We have to look at all the non-exempt assets, like in this example here of the $10,000. And we also have to worry about disposable income, Schedule I and Schedule J. Go back to those seminars if you have to. But if you have disposable income, I don't care if you pass the means test. I don't care if your property is non-exempt. You have $500 left over. You're doing Chapter 13 no matter what. Again, why? Because they wanted debtors to end up doing more Chapter 13s than they did Chapter 7. Okay, so as you see here, again, they all work in conjunction, right? We have to worry about Schedule I and J, just like I said, the means testing. I have given the examples before. Sometimes you got to delay the case. The two examples I always give, and one's in the book, was a client who made $10,000 in 1 month in commissions. He's never made that before, never made that since. Just happens everybody was fired from their job and he took all their commissions. But I simply just delayed the case. That's all I did. If memory serves me correct, he was on month 3 when this happened. So I had to wait 4 more months, and then poof, magically, those $10,000 were no longer part of the means testing. That's why means testing is criticized. It doesn't, there's what's one quick way around it. The other example that I experienced, every bankruptcy lawyer experienced, was during COVID. You didn't qualify today, but when you haven't worked in 3 months because of COVID, all of a sudden you qualified, and all of a sudden we went from chapter 13 to chapter 7. Now remember, this is Florida. There's a homestead exemption, full amount. So maybe in other states where the exemptions are minimal, it wasn't going to matter what they did, even if they had their income was below the threshold amount, under below the means test. Again, if there's non-exempt equity or assets or disposable income, then COVID didn't do nothing. But for bankruptcy lawyers in Florida or any other state that had, good, strong protections when it comes to the homestead exemption, then they got away with filing a Chapter 7. Okay. Now, I did put here, and I just want to focus on this for a second. I did put, the issue of secured debt. But this is a question, I have said a couple times already that secured debt will change all the numbers when it comes to means testing. Now, the problem is when the trustee, we're in 2025 and the trustee says, oh, you just bought a new car and we're only 3 months in. So it's March 15th today. Trustee says, oh, you bought a new car in January. That the question becomes, did this standard debt help that debtor pass the means test? Because if it is, we already know the trustee is going to object, and bankruptcy isn't going to work. That's like, sometimes they ask, when did you see your lawyer? And they say, well, I saw my lawyer in March, and I filed a few weeks later, whatever. My tax refund. That's something that happens this times a year where clients have more money. And so the trustee knows that it's okay. But if the trustee says, well, I met with my lawyer in December, and then in January I bought a new car and I'm here to file bankruptcy now, and the means test did help me pass, guess what? The trustee is going to have some questions for the lawyer. So be aware of that issue. If something, sometimes clients come in a couple months later, and maybe the lawyer said, well, means testing, and they kind of explained the issue with secure debt, and they show up with a new car and you didn't know about this prior consultation, then we're setting up the lawyer for a trap. The lawyer needs to decide when the case should be filed. Now, if they were going to pass the means test no matter what, then obviously it has no effect. What I have been in a situation, I just prove it. It was no big deal. Um, Sometimes clients are in bankruptcy, and then the problem, or not in bankruptcy, but they buy a car recently, and then it's this issue again. Did you buy a car just to qualify for the means test? No, the answer is the other car fell apart or it was a total loss. Now, if it's a total loss, remember, same question. Was there a car accident involved that led to a total loss? And now there might be personal injury lawsuits involved where the bankruptcy estate could take a part of that. I serve as a good example. Hurricane Helene totaled my wife's car. Nothing fell on it. It was just a bunch of panels hit the roof and everything else, panels from a neighbor's house. And they hit my camper, which should have been a total loss. You can read those articles as well. But it wasn't because the insurance company screwed up. And I'll put that in the description. I'll make a note now, as a matter of fact, to include that. But the problem was it was a total loss at the end of the day, but there was no personal injury lawsuit. So say my wife was going to file bankruptcy now, they would say, well, you just bought a car in February. Hold on, let's do the means testing. Say, well, wait a minute. The car was a total loss. I filed that claim 2 days after the hurricane. I think if I remember correctly, September 27th. I couldn't get into a body shop until late December, and they finally said just bring it in the first week of January. So it wasn't until I think January 7th that the insurance company totaled it. So yeah, I had no choice but to get a new car. So that would be an example. Sometimes you might get into more debt and it might help you pass the means test, but this is stuff beyond your control. The trustee shouldn't have a problem with that. Okay. So I'm done with this. The next one we're going to go over is Chapter 13. Why would we file Chapter 13? What are some examples? So just stick around for that video. I'm going to start pumping out these videos a little quicker, I hope, because I know I've taken a while. But stick around. You'll see Chapter 13 coming up soon. As always, any questions or comments, feel free to post them in the comments section of this video. All right. Thank you. And since it's been a long time since I've said this, I hope all you paralegals and legal studies students who are using this course and are using my textbook in your courses, I hope everything is going well with school. All right. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.